You are not here to be told the truth. You are here, hopefully, to learn how to think for yourself. However you come down on this or any other issue is your business, not mine. How we test you is not, do you believe in evolution, but how does science believe evolution works? And your own belief is your business or not. We've talked about the principles of evolution as we understand them. And let's talk about how that has resulted in who we are, why we're sitting in this room, how it has resulted in the evolution of humans physically, and the evolution of human culture. Remember, evolution means only gradual change. But the mechanisms may be quite different. Now, our understanding of conditions that ended in the end of the dinosaurs being found on the Earth once the dominant organisms, and I guess you've all grown up in dinosaur mania, probably was that an asteroid, a large block of matter from outer space, crashed into, people didn't know for a long time. Now we think we've found it in Yucatan Peninsula in southern Mexico. Blew a lot of material into the air that did a number of things that seemed to work, that changed the environment against the conditions that the dinosaur required for their life, including, in all probability, changing the temperature of the Earth for some extended period of time, simply with the debris put in the atmosphere. We don't know exactly that this is how it happened, but got lots and lots of consistent clues. And anyway, if the climate changed, there began to be selection for having an insulating coat. And presumably that's where humans came from. Now, Jen, I'm not meaning this in any sense whatsoever to make any fun of you or whatever. But I would say an alternate view.
She stepped out for a second.
The alternate view is divine intervention. Okay, what is it? Where did we come from? Did humans evolve from apes? There is no evidence for that at all. There was some common ancestors, and there was divergence. And some of these led to apes, and some of these led to humans. At one time, in fact, there were as many as 6 or 8 completely different species that we have found skulls from in Eastern Africa of organisms that were ape-like, but that were not in any sense related to any existing monkeys or apes, and in fact were more related morphologically, that means in their shape, to humans. One of these 6 or 8 different species prospered over time and now covers the Earth with 6 billion, more than 6 billion, and that's what we call Homo sapiens. So let's kind of take a view of what Africa, the Rift Valley of Africa, might have looked like, where we find so many fossils of creatures that are very much like us, but not exactly like us at the time. Groups of creatures wandering about, family groups, extended family groups, that were eating a variety of foods. Our teeth are best suited for vegetation, but also capable of eating animal material, and my guess is humans probably ate also a lot of carrion at that time. And here are several species, one of which became our ancestors. Now, an interesting thing is, remember we say that natural selection is always responding to climate change. Climate change perhaps being a cooling of the environment due to this smashing of an asteroid into the Earth, which incidentally could occur any hour, again. And one of the features of this particular species that have made this species so incredibly successful in terms of being able to overwhelm the Earth with its influence. So maybe the most important thing about humans, well, a number of important things. One of the first of the important things is the opposable thumb. It allows us to use tools, which cows have a great deal of difficulty in so doing. And I often think of this when I listen to an orchestra with so many people. How many people play a musical instrument? Wow. Isn't it incredible that you can do that? Try to teach your dog to play a musical instrument. Our hands are free because we're standing upright. We have opposable thumbs allowing us to hold a violin bow or to play a flute or any other wind instrument or whatever. Well, this opposable thumb and standing up are two of the most, standing on 2 feet, leaving the hands free, have allowed us this incredible ability to use tools. And tools are an enormously important part of who we are now and what we are able to do now. Where did this opposable thumb come from? Well, you find it in some of the anthropoid, meaning man-like apes, that if you are living in arboreal, that is in existence in a tree, as apparently our ancestors did at some time, you can understand the selective advantage for having an opposable thumb. Excuse me, would you be for a moment a branch? Could you stand for a moment, please? So if I am in the tree, and if you've seen, I'm sure you've all seen on the nature channels and so forth, apes and monkeys moving around in the trees, it's incredible watching them do it. And if you're going from one branch to another, it's sure good to be able to grab it with the thumb on the other side, locking your grip, then grabbing it like this. And you can see how there might be natural selection. You're supposed to be a tree. You can see how there might be natural selection, thank you, for having an opposable thumb living in this environment. But our ancestors didn't stay there. What happened? We think this happened. We're not quite sure. We think that the environment our ancestors were in, which was originally mostly forest, dried out a bit because the climate was always changing. And when it dried out a bit, there was a more generation of a savanna type environment. And if you are now living in a savanna environment, which has many food resources, because often it's the grass-fed ecosystems often have food chains that are much easier for humans to exploit with animals and with carrion, with dead animals, and with many vegetative products in these environments. But there becomes, when you are no longer living in an arboreal existence, a large advantage to standing on your back 2 legs and watching for the lions. Is that simple? I don't know. And as your ability to use tools evolve, changes slowly over time, and remember, we have found humans' remains associated with tools that are radiocarbon and otherwise dated to go back, I believe, 500,000 years. People have been using tools for a long, long time. Even some of these different species have been using tools for a long, long time. And so, 2 of the most important attributes of humans have to do with being able to stand up and use a tool over time, and that has given us tremendous opportunity for our ability to exploit nature. Now, a third and very special attribute that humans have is language. If you have language, if you learn something, you're able to transfer it to your family members, to your children. You're able to increase your ability to be able to use the environment around you to support yourself and your family. And then, if you do this, you will have a larger energy surplus on average, and this larger energy surplus will be translated into the probability that your children are more likely to survive. So the evolution of language and mental ability are very, very important. But going back to the early days, what have the Wilsons got? Fire. The Wilsons have fire and they have spears. Both of these are energy devices. The fire is an energy device, obviously, because it allows you to gain heat. Let me tell you how important heat energy is for the diet. First of all, if you're eating a lot of half-rotten meat and so forth, it's pretty advantageous to cook it. Get rid of some of those nasty microbes. Another thing that's very important is that with fire you can cook tough plant materials. You know from botany that the difference between a plant cell and an animal cell is that the plant has a cell wall. That's hard to digest. And if you have fire, then you can boil the vegetables, take what was formerly inedible material and turn it to edible material. The spear point is a critical issue. What a spear point is an energy, or technically a force, concentrating mechanism. So, excuse me, if I may take this, if she's a big wild animal, fierce wild animal, but looks tasty, if I want to try to kill her, it's pretty tough just beating on her with my fists. But if I concentrate that with a spear point, the results are that I'm able to do much more work in this case being simply penetrating the animal hide. In addition, I get to wear the hide of the animal, as Mrs. Wilson has on here, nice leopard skin, and this enabled humans to exploit a larger temperature regime on the face of the earth. And it was only when humans got the ability to get animal skins that they were able to leave the relatively temperate environment of Africa and spread over the earth, and we'll talk more about that later. So remember, the major tools that we have are increasing our control over energy. And what did we do with this increasing control over energy? We increase our ability to exploit nature. Now, when I use the word exploit, it is not meant to be pejorative. That means bad. It means what exploitation is. It's the same way a plant exploits the nitrogen in the soil, or the carbon dioxide in the air, or a trout exploits the insects of a stream. It is turning other components of the ecosystem into food and resources for itself, contributing to survival, growth, net energy surpluses, and reproduction, and hence there will be natural selection for those organisms that figure out ways to do this. Okay, now of course as time went on, another thing that was very important for people was to learn how to be a social animal. So humans greatly increased their ability to exploit other creatures, and probably did from long, long ago, by joining into social groups that could do things collectively much better than they could do individually. And that's the key to understanding our own probably biological or evolution, but clearly cultural evolution. Now, many other organisms, elephants and whales and many of the apes and even ants, are social animals, and there appears to have been strong selective advantage for some, but not all, organisms, in fact not most, to work together in groups to accomplish common purposes. Now, we have a brain about the size of a cantaloupe or something, a small cantaloupe, but are we responding to our environment any better than the dinosaurs? Well, we shall see, I suppose, or you will. I'll be gone, but we'll see what's going to go on in the future. Of course, we're going to be talking about that some more in this course. There were many things that humans had to adjust to through evolution to become the incredible tough creature that we all are in this room that made it through this long geological time. Probably the most important thing each of you have that you don't even think about, that is a gift of evolution, or of God if you wish, is our immune system. There is stuff coming at us all the time. Now, that's just one. You look at our incredible athletes. Well, there has been strong natural selection in our ancestors to have these tremendous physical abilities to be able to run down prey, presumably, to avoid enemies, and probably to fight with each other and win when that came up. All of these leaving us with this incredible ability to play in an orchestra or play basketball or something like that. I'd like to talk about one more issue because it's unfortunately in contemporary America, in the world, it's such an important issue. If you look around the room, we all have very different skin colors. Why should that be? Why don't we all have the same skin color? Well, why don't all dogs have the same skin color or coat color? Well, they don't. But I think I understand it a little bit. A few years ago, I went to my skin doctor, and he starts carving out pre-cancerous hunks of my skin. I was a lifeguard when I was a kid. I was in the sun a lot, and it impacted my cells, and it's now coming to fruition. And if he hadn't done that, I probably would have gotten cancer and might be dead by now. So I said, geez, what a bummer. And he says, yeah. And I thought about it for a while, and I said, well, how about your black patients? Do they have these kinds of cancers? And he says, almost never. Almost never, but most of my white patients do. So I said, who gave me this crummy skin? Why should I not be protected from cancer? Almost never, but most of my white patients do. So I said, who gave me this crummy skin? Why should I not be protected from cancer? But I thought about it, and I did a little bit of research, and I found out what's probably the answer. When my ancestors were stupid enough to go up to the frozen north, and my genes come from England and perhaps ultimately Scandinavia at some point, and of course all of us back eventually to Africa. But people that are from that neck of the woods tend to have lighter skin and sometimes lighter hair color. Why? Well, what is it that we need from the sky, from the sun? Vitamin D, right? Sunshine, vitamin D. And what happens when you go up to far northern regions and cover yourselves over with animal skins? You're not exposing yourself to the sun. So there is a general tendency for people, the further away you go from areas where the sun shines 12 months of the year with intensity, to have lighter skin. And I understand that this is in fact the probable reason that people like me have skin that seems so useless before we had lots of vitamin D supplements in our food, there was a stronger selection to get that precious vitamin D than to worry about cancer. Because, in fact, you don't get cancer normally until you get old, and most of our ancestors were dead by 30. It's only relatively recently that we've lived this long. Now, I'm going to ask you some questions about your reading. Can you tell me what Liebig's law of the minimum is?
The minimal, your growth is limited by the smallest nutrient or the smallest.
Good, close enough. The growth of, for example, a plant is limited by the chemical nutrient that it requires, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, calcium, etc. That is their least relative to the demands of the plant. All right? What are the common limiting nutrients?
Sulfur?
Rarely, but occasionally, yes.
Nitrogen.
Nitrogen is most important. After carbon, nitrogen is in general, ecologically speaking, the most important chemical nutrient. Okay. What are other important ones? Phosphorus. What else?
Carbon.
Carbon, okay, yeah. What else? Yep. Potassium. Okay, now where do you find phosphorus in this young lady? Under her fingernail? No. Where do we find phosphorus? Bones. Teeth? Where else? ATP? The energy chemicals in our body? Where else? DNA. Good. Very, very important chemical. Where do we find nitrogen in this fellow? Muscles. Okay, basically all, everywhere really, but muscles is a good place. Proteins are made of nitrogen. Okay. What is a higher energy form of carbon? If you want to burn a carbonaceous fuel, would you want to burn a chemical made of CO2 or of glucose or of methane? Those are all carbon-containing compounds. What's your name?
Derek.
Derek?
Methane.
Methane, CH4.
CH4.
CO2, carbon dioxide, or glucose, sugar?
Glucose.
Okay, glucose would be the best fuel in your opinion.
For me.
For you.
Yeah.
He got me. For you, you're correct. But Derek, which has the highest energy content?
I'd imagine methane.
Why?
Has the most carbon.
No, it's got...
hydrogen.
Aha, well, that's the only thing left. Yes. If you oxidize hydrogen, more energy is released than carbon. Okay? So, chemically, in the great class of chemical compounds, what is a fuel?
What is a fuel?
What is a fuel? Trick. Got lots of hydrogen. Not trick. Hint. Therefore,
Potential to be oxidized.
Potential to be oxidized, which means the substance is
Flammable.
reduced. Good. Who did that? Very nice. What's your name? Catherine. Good. Reduced compounds, of which hydrogen is the ultimate example, and methane is a pretty good example, have the greatest potential to be oxidized. So you take methane, which is natural gas, and you combine it with oxygen, and you get water and CO2, and a lot of energy is released. We call those hydrocarbons. They have hydrogen and carbon. How about carbohydrates? Is there carbohydrates in your reading? Yeah. And what's ATE mean at the end of a word? Good chemists here?
Oxygen, correct.
Has oxygen. Good. Has oxygen. You do. Good. Has carbohydrate means it's got carbon and hydrogen and oxygen together. That's why glucose, which is a carbohydrate, is a little bit less potent a fuel than methane. Why hasn't evolution evolved mechanisms for humans or for any organism to use methane as fuel if it has more energy? Yes?
Glucose is more abundant.
Glucose is more abundant. Where do you go methane? Where do you go fill up on methane around here, huh? Where did your ancestors go? Oh, excuse me, let's go over to the methane well and get a drink here, yeah? It wasn't there. There was makes no sense to evolve mechanisms for using a fuel that's not there. Glucose, carbohydrates, starches. Starches are just glucose or sugar molecules put together. All of those were abundant in the world in which we evolved, and therefore we use them as fuels. Why would a predator contain perhaps 1,000,000 times more DDT or PCBs in their tissues than the surrounding environment?
Because everything that it eats and everything that those organisms eat has accumulated a certain amount of DDT, a small amount, and that can never be washed out of the body, so to
Why?
speak. Because it's fat soluble. I
Fat
think.
soluble, okay. What are you made of?
A lot of fats.
A lot of fat, me especially, but you too. Yeah,
So
probably you when you get a little older, yeah.
So when the animal eats something else that has all these DDTs in its fat-soluble body, it takes in those DDTs and that immediately dissolves into the predator's
And
body.
then how about the lion that eats you?
Then he's got all the DDT I had and whatever else he's eaten too.
And whatever his lunch was yesterday and the day before as well. And he'll concentrate it in, or she, the lion ladies do the killing, concentrate the DDT in their own tissues over time, and therefore the lion will have more DDT than you, and you more than the fish you ate, and the fish more than the minnow it ate, and the minnow more than the bug it ate, etc. Okay, that is called food chain concentration. And that's going to help lead us into the next topic that we have, which in fact is on your schedule. The main topic of the day is the concept of the relation of evolution and the development of organism strategies for existence to the environments in which they're found. I always like this little diagram that shows different types of shorebirds. Curlew, black-tailed godwit, a redshank, a knot, a sanderling, a ring plover. Any of you spend time on beaches and see the little birds running around on the beaches? Now, the interesting thing is, each of them has a different length bill and a different feeding strategy, and each of them has specialized over time to exploit the animals and sometimes the plants that live in the beach environment. So there's a kind of cops and robber game going on here where the organisms that live, the potential food of these birds that live in the beach environment are often evolving different strategies to avoid the birds while the birds are evolving different strategies to exploit the organisms over time. And so you see here, this bird in particular, this curlew, has a very long beak, long enough to get most of the animals there. But this guy has figured out how to avoid all the birds. But he has a problem, because most of the food is found at the surface where there's photosynthesis. So there's trade-offs. There's always trade-offs amongst these different organisms. But the point is that there's different strategies for exploiting the resources of any environment. Now, in order to understand what the potential is over time for supporting humans and human cultures in these environments, one of the main things that humans have had to adapt to? Well, here's a classic old picture from a guy named Howard Odum, who was my doctoral advisor, which he published in 1957, if you can believe anybody was alive back then, of what was called a trophic pyramid. Trophic means food, pyramid means pyramid. These are the plants in the organism. Then the turtles and mullet that eat the plants, the shrimp that may eat the plants, and snails, and then the stump knockers that, and the coelenterids and the various fish that eat the herbivorous animals, and then the top, what we might be associated with as bass, is a top carnivore. Now the point is, in general, but not always, an environment will have a lot of plants, not so many herbivores, fewer yet carnivores, and top carnivores, which we are often most interested in, tend to be very rare. So, what does it make the most sense to exploit in the environment if you're an omnivore?
The first level.
The first level, plants. They're most abundant. Now, it's not quite that simple, but it's more or less something like that. So if you look at human teeth, they're evolved for eating principally plants. And in fact, even today, where protein is very abundant, probably the majority of our food intake, and certainly for people on the planet as a whole, are of grains, of rice, wheat, and corn principally, or their derivatives. Now, the problem with eating plants, though, is that the plants defend themselves against getting eaten. And most plants, in fact, are inedible. Go walk around in a forest. I do this sometimes, and chew on different leaves. Many of them just taste horrible. And what they are they're defended with what are called secondary compounds. The plants make alkaloids and other kinds of chemicals, terpenes, that's the smell of a pine tree, to make them inedible to humans. So only a small proportion of all plant material is accessible to herbivores and to humans, with the exception that on a savanna or a grassland, grass has been selected to grow fast with low defenses rather than to grow relatively slowly like a tree with higher defenses. So there are all kinds of potential foods out there, but most of them can't be exploited. Now, the trick, of course, with humans was what? Agriculture. Encouraging, through technology, the growth of the species most useful to us. That has led through time to the situation of today where half of all photosynthesis on the face of this planet is used by humans, directly or indirectly. Isn't that an amazing thing? One species. How many species are there on the planet? Jordan, how many species are there? You know?
Millions.
Hundreds of millions, probably. Tens of millions, certainly. Maybe hundreds of millions. So only one species, our own, through this evolution of tools, culture, and technology, now exploits half of all photosynthesis on the planet. And that has meant, and from the biologist's view, we're very successful, with a few problems.